Blackmagic just added two brand new studio cameras to their lineup, the 4K Plus and the 4K Pro. In this video, we're gonna talk about the specs of these cameras and more importantly, whether or not they're a good idea for your church to invest in them. As many of you know, Blackmagic kind of owns the prosumer market when it comes to live and even produced video gear and equipment. And once again, they've put something out there that's a great value for churches looking to live stream and record video. Now we're gonna talk about whether these two new cameras are a good fit for churches, but if you're still looking for gear to fit either live streaming or pre-recording for your church and you wanna make some upgrades but aren't sure where to start, make sure you check out the free church video gear guide linked in the description below. So the two studio cameras that just got announced by Blackmagic are the 4K Plus and the 4K Pro. Now there are some things these cameras have in common, so we're gonna talk about those first before talking about the things that the 4K Pro has that the 4K Plus doesn't. So the first thing they have in common is their sensor. Just like every other camera in the 4K range for Blackmagic, they're a micro four thirds mount, and now the sensor and color science on these studio cameras is actually the same as their pocket cinema cameras. So you get the same amount of dynamic range, which is 13.5 stops. You're gonna have the same colors and the same 3D LUTs are built in as well. You've still got a range between 23.98 and 60 frames per second at 4K. And what's new is that you can actually record with these studio cameras now. The previous edition of studio cameras did not have any kind of output for recording besides just a standard SDI video out. So that's a huge upgrade for this camera line, the studio cameras that can now record USB-C straight to an SSD. There's actually two USB-C ports on there. We'll talk about what those can be used for later, but the big deal is that you can record directly to an SSD with the studio cameras now, and they record in Blackmagic RAW. It's a great codec, it's very efficient, and it is RAW, which means you can do literally anything you want with it in post, and it's not going to look distorted, blown out, or ruined because of the way you're stretching it. Some of the other stuff that both cameras share in common is a 7-inch LCD touchscreen. Now, touchscreen is not part of the original studio cam lineup, so that's a huge upgrade. Obviously, a big 7-inch screen is very helpful for volunteers to be able to see what they're looking at, frame and focus better. And I think that's a huge part of why these cameras are great for live production. And to be able to have touchscreens makes it way more intuitive to actually get where you want to go versus the previous lineup where you had to find the right button and kind of navigate menus and all that jazz. They also have big tally lights. It is built into the cameras, so if that's something you've wanted and you've been running pocket cinemas or other cameras and you move over to these guys, you're gonna have that studio broadcast style feature in every camera. Finally, the dual native ISO that's in the pocket cinema cameras is now part of the studio cam lineup as well. This is one of my favorite parts of the pocket cinema lineup because their second set of ISO circuitry that starts at 1250 ISO is so clean. You can run it really high, almost Sony camera high without distortion or noise in your image when you're shooting indoors. Low light is a really important part of church live streaming because most of us are shooting in somewhat dark environments, and so having clean dual native ISO to enable you to shoot a low grain image even in a darker setting is a really big deal. Okay, now let's talk about the 4K Plus and what it can do as an individual camera unit. So the 4K Plus is basically designed for ATEM mini units and it's HDMI based. So there's an HDMI output, but that's it when it comes to audio and video inputs and outputs on the camera. The nice thing is that HDMI actually is able to carry tally, talkback, color correction, and obviously audio video bidirectionally. So all you need is an HDMI cable and you're able to do all that from ATEM control software if you're using an ATEM mini switcher. Just a quick note here, if you have to run more than 30 or 40 feet and you're worried, well, I have to run SDI, am I gonna have to buy a different camera? You don't. Just get the UpDownCross converter from Blackmagic. It's essentially two converters in one. It has one converter going to the switcher and one converter going back, and it allows you to convert to SDI and from SDI back into that single HDMI cable so that you can use TalkBack and Tally if you're not using an ATEM mini model, or just if you need to run longer distances and convert to SDI for part of that run, that's gonna work great for you. All right, now let's talk about the 4K Pro. And I have to say, I am really excited about this camera. So it keeps the HDMI connection from the 4K Plus. And remember, HDMI was not a part of the previous studio camera lineups because HDMI is not a broadcast standard device protocol. So that's a new addition that makes life easy. So they keep that on the 4K Pro model, but they now add 12G SDI connections for both in and out. 12G SDI is 4K capable over one cable. So if you're wanting to build a 4K infrastructure for the future, this camera is ready to go for that. The touchscreen is HDR, it's the same size, but it's got a lot more brightness. So if you're shooting outside, it's easier to see. And you also have 2 XLR inputs. So you can run 1 mic, 2 mics, doesn't matter, but you've got a lot higher quality inputs for audio into the camera, which is a really nice feature for any produced type of work. Finally, the absolute best feature of this camera is that it's got a 10 gig Ethernet connection built in. So I'm not an IT guy. I've seen HD base T for NDI and PTZ workflows, and I'm kind of familiar with that. This is described as a 10G base T connection. So if you know more about that, please throw a comment down below. I'm sure all of us would love to know, but I can tell you for sure what that allows you to do, and it's very impressive. 10G base T allows you to do PoE, so you're gonna get all the power your camera needs just from that one Ethernet connection. Plus, it carries all of your signals as well. So if you're running a Cat 6A type cable into this connection, it's gonna let you carry obviously video and audio, but also talkback, tally, and color correction all in one cable. So essentially, you can put this camera anywhere in the room, even outside. And as long as you're running a Cat 6A cable into that and it's coming out of the right kind of device on the other end, which I'll talk about in a second, this camera will run completely independent of any other connection at all. It's so awesome. So you may be asking, well, that's great, but where does the other end of the cable go? Well, you need to buy a device called the Blackmagic Studio Converter that essentially breaks out all of the signals from that Ethernet cable into SDI and audio and talkback and all that jazz that'll go into your switcher from there. The studio converters are $895, which is a lot cheaper than the $2,000 breakout converters for SMPTE cables if you're trying to convert away from those. So I think it's a pretty good deal, and you only need 1 per camera as opposed to 2 if you're a SMPTE-based system. All right, so now the question you're probably asking is, that's super great, but how expensive are these cameras? Because they sound pretty capable. They're probably out of our price range. And this is the most shocking thing about it, is that the 4K Plus camera is literally only $1295, and the 4K Pro camera is only $1795. Honestly, like when I saw these prices, I thought I was on the wrong page because these cameras, I was expecting to be at least around $2,500 per camera. To me, there is probably no better value out there for live streaming than these new 4K Plus and Pro models for your church. At $1295, the 4K Plus is the exact same price as the Pocket Cinema 4K. So really, you're comparing apples to apples as far as the same sensor size, same lens mount, and honestly, very, very similar capabilities at this point. The Pocket Cinema camera has ProRes built in, so you've got a little bit more options when it comes to recording codecs. But honestly, everything else about the camera's capabilities is, again, the same sensor, same color science, same lens mount. But when you've got the 4K Plus, you're talking about a giant built-in screen that's easy to see. It's still a touchscreen. It still records to SSDs. Yes, there's no CFast or SD card slots. So there is a little bit less capability, but there's way more connectivity with the 4K Plus. Unlike broadcast cameras, the 4K Plus is actually pretty small. It's only a few pounds. It does have a sunshade on it that makes it look pretty big, but if you take that off, it's really just a taller DSLR, like mirrorless body style. So it's not too big to carry on location and shoot an interview with, to be totally honest. And because it takes the same micro four thirds lenses, it is just really easy to work into your flow. So if you're already using that platform, you're wanting to add a camera, I really think you should take a look at this option. When it comes to the 4K Pro, for an additional $500 to get SDI in and out, to get that incredible Ethernet connection that allows you to do everything in just one cable, to have XLR in, 2 XLR ins actually, and still be able to record. Plus, I didn't even talk about how the USB-C connections work for zoom and focus control, which they are starting to sell controllers for these cameras for only $250 each. So you can have professional handheld controls down at a comfortable place and never have to reach around and adjust your lens or focus again. I mean, that's a very affordable studio camera setup that I really think you should take a hard look at if your church is looking to add some cameras to your live production setup. All in all, I'm a really big fan of these cameras. I can't wait to get my hands on one to actually see how it shoots, how it handles. But in the meantime, looking at the specs and the capabilities, and most importantly, the incredible price point for under $2,000 to get this 4K Pro model. I mean, I think this is yet again another great value from Blackmagic. I'm sure there's some things about it we won't love, but to be honest, to save 80% of the cost over real broadcast cameras and get the same capabilities, I think I can put up with a few things. So that's it for today. Again, check out the free church video gear guide if you want some help with gear. We're updating that all the time to keep you in the latest news when it comes to good options for your church. And I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe so other people can find this and we can help grow the church better through video. That's it, guys. I'll see you next time.